Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and our guest today is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
I noticed that most of the time on this show, we are discussing possible counterattack of Ukrainians in Crimea or maybe some other
hmm
places.
Yep.
And
That's my vote for what would be the most potentially decisive, because that's obviously the most valuable of the occupied territories that Russia is currently occupying. They acquired it illegally, as you know, in 2014, and its acquisition or recovery by the Ukrainians would be, in my opinion, the most decisive operational blow that would have the greatest potential political effect on the outcome of the war. And
uh,
your take?
if and when it will happen, I will be the happiest person really to witness that. I'm somewhat skeptical on that event taking place. Not tell you why. Because the other thing what we are discussing a lot, it's situation in Ukraine itself. Talk about corruption, talk about the possible presidential and other elections, but first of all, presidential, of course. And that's what Trump now is insisting that should happen anytime now. And the third theme, which eclipsing now the first one in the view of a possible Ukrainian attack, is the possible, first of all, stagnation on the front lines. Nobody can make any progress, neither Russians nor Ukrainians. But therefore, the most important factor, and we have to take care of that sooner or later. Let's do it now, because there is a lot of material already is available in public, including and so on. So we cannot ignore it and just play it. Well, it's business as usual. Well, one day it looks this way, and the other day it looks different way, or so on. So-called peace negotiations, if you can call it that way. Let's call it that way to simplify it. So, sometimes these negotiations, I'll give you an example from the business. It's happened in my career when I had a business, which I've discussed financing with different parties, and eventually we concentrated on one option. And why I choose that option is that the person who was on the other end negotiating with me, he was, believe it or not, my distant relative. So
Oh, okay. Oh, those are always tricky.
it's tricky, and I underestimated the dangers of
Mm.
negotiating with distant. Now, relative. Now what's happened is that first of all, he was painting the golden picture of what's going to happen with the company after this investment, and it's
Mhm.
happened this and that, and some major alliances will be built, or so on. So, okay, so now you are not thinking straight all of a
Right.
sudden. You're now thinking, okay, maybe it will not work out, but there is a chance that it will work out. And in that case, you're much better off. So why not to try to give it a chance?
hmm
Okay, so you signed a kind of a letter of intent, for example. Then he's saying that, well, he would like to better understand the business of the company. So he would like to have one of his people to become vice president of operation, just to get familiar with that. Nothing more.
He's infiltrating your organization.
Exactly. So while you get that person in, he is talking to other people of my team. And all of a sudden now I feel that I'm losing confidence of these people, because now they're saying that, well, this what you're proposing is not 100% correct. This is not going to work out. Or so. So there is a growing resistance. And it all ended up with the quite negative result at the end of the day. I had to share control of the company. I didn't get investment as it was earlier agreed. And essentially, I had to play kind of a way out of the situation, at least for myself, completely to
Right.
not going broke from this episode, which I didn't. But I've learned something interesting, and that reminds me approach Trump to this peace negotiations. First of all, the most important thing, it's not even, well, territory is still the most important thing, but equally important is the uh, position of Ukrainian security once any peace will be agreed. And it's becoming almost as important as territory because you can give more territories or less territories. But if you don't have real security guarantees, you have
Yeah.
nothing. Actually, you have less
We
than
we should have learned that lesson. And the former President Bill Clinton, belatedly recognized that he may have made a major mistake. He probably made a major mistake in agreeing to the Budapest Memorandum, which had Ukraine give up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for what? As
nothing.
it turned out, nothing.
Yeah, but this time is very different from the time of Budapest Memorandum because Clinton was not involved in running of Ukraine and getting some kind of deals through Ukraine with Russians or any other parties. So that was basically one-time transaction. They wanted to concentrate our nuclear weapons in Russia instead of having it in 4 countries.
Right.
Now it's only one, so the perception was it would be easier to control with one country and to talk about possible, maybe even elimination of nuclear weapons if possible, than with 4 countries. However, what's happening right now? Uh, Trump is talking very little about security guarantees. Actually, he prefers not to talk about it at all, only when somebody asks him directly. And then he says, oh, yeah, for sure there will be security guarantees. What kind of security guarantees? How they will be spelled out? Are they going to be ratified by Congress? Nothing at all. But Trump is spending a lot of time talking to Europeans and Ukrainians and Russians about, for example, $250 billion of frozen Russian funds.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So Trump is saying is that that's going to be controlled by special entities of United States where Europe will bring even more money and all that money will be used for very, very useful projects for Ukraine, and that's how Ukraine will be rebuilt and all that stuff. That reminds me what I've heard from my possible partner,
Yeah.
distant relative,
And
how wonderful everything is going to
yeah,
be.
right. And I would remind you to the reason that President Trump is arguing in those terms is because that is the paradigm he is most familiar with. He has not been trained or educated in traditional national security policy or history for that matter. His studies did not involve the study of history, military history, political history. He knows nothing of the, for example, yeah, he would find my book, The Russian View of U.S. Strategy, because really it's the only one of its kind that looks at the Russian view, of our strategy, what factors influence it, and how this affects their foreign policy goals. Now, that provides a unique perspective, which most people are not familiar with unless they happen to take one of my classes. But in any case, what's interesting is that the Trump team, and I would argue most, if not all of the Trump team, is not familiar with the fact that other countries do not share our perspective. And matter of fact, Americans have, and this fault is shared by the Russians as well. Americans tend to mirror image, project their own view of the world onto the rest of the world, and assume that logical, rational people think like we do. That's mirror imaging. Psychologists call it projection, where you project your own mindset onto other people and assume that they're acting and thinking the same way you are. And we know from practical experience that that is not true. But the fact is, the Trump administration is projecting an economic mindset and strategy onto the rest of the world, thinking that, oh, surely the Russians will be willing to make a deal. All people want to make a deal, a good deal. And they forget that, or they do not know that the Russians do not think in those terms. They do not think in terms of the currency of money gaining monetary gain in the shall we say the capitalist sense. Their currency is power. Their currency is influence, and be able to, and what the Russians call kto kvo, whom, who is superior to whom, who dominates whom. In Russian culture, really, you are either someone's inferior or you are their superior. You are never their equal. Equality to the Russian mindset is simply a foreign thing. It's a temporary state of affairs until the proper superior-inferior relationship in Russian culture can be established. Who is in charge? So that is very different. And it is a concept that the Trump administration simply cannot grasp.
From talking about further on this economic realities of possible peace in Ukraine, there are several new factors are now in play. Let's start psychological, an easy one. It's very typical for Slavic people and Ukrainians and Russians in particular. Whenever they are discussing some kind of a new project or a new deal or whatever, the question number one of any listener, even very distantly involved, what's in it for me? How I am going to benefit from this grandiose deal?
We oddly enough, Sasha, we in classes at the Joint Military Intelligence College, now the National Intelligence College, National Intelligence University, and various classes on looking at critical thinking and things like that. Yeah, that they motivate the students by saying the acronym WIFM, WIIFM. What's in it for me? What are you going to? We have to explain to the students. This is what you are going. This is what your benefit you are going to gain from this block of instruction. This is how you will profit. This is what it will make it. This is what will make your job easier. We have to explain it to the students in terms of their own enlightened self-interest. This is why you should pay attention to what's being taught. And so, yes, I'm familiar with that in a different context. And yeah, it is a universal human trait.
Exactly. So now Americans are more and more asking from this Trump's grandiose deal of taking over this $250 billion, and then Europeans adding more. By the way, Europeans are furious even at the suggestion that Trump will have anything to do whatsoever with this $250 billion.
Right. They want to spend it essentially on behalf of Ukraine.
Absolutely.
And which in turn, by the way, infuriates the Russians. The Russians are absolutely, you're going to take our frozen assets and do what? You're going to spend it on the Ukrainians? You svolic.
So you're right. But so Trump is now threatening Europeans. You don't even think of touching this money. That's not yours. It's Russian money. Get out of the Russian money. Don't even touch it. So supposedly, if Europeans would get this money or even part of it and would use it to buy more of American-produced weapons. Right. So what's so wrong about that? For Donald, it is the wrong thing because it
interferes with his ability to potentially make a deal with the Russians. Yeah.
Now, coming further than that is that in domestic front, Trump is getting more and more opposition to particular Ukrainian situation. And more than just Ukrainian situation, but Ukrainian is number one now, where Congress is now resisting any of Trump's plans. And with his popularity going big time down, really big time down, I think that more and more congressmen and senators will find themselves on opposing end of the talking points with Trump, I'm afraid. And essentially, Zelensky is playing very cool. He's
Oh yeah, yeah. He's good.
basically
Zelensky. I would readily agree with you that Zelensky is playing his cards, which which President Trump insisted he did not have, but which then Zelensky proved through military action. Yes, we do have cards, and we're still playing them, and we have more to play. We're just not going to tell you about them. And so what's going to happen is I suspect again, and I have full confidence in the ability of the Ukrainian military and political leadership. They are not perfect, but they do know their own self-interest, and they have the capability to spring unexpected surprises on their opponents and their allies. So I would say right now we wait through the winter. The Ukrainians are going to continue their political and military actions. Zelensky is going to continue to steadfastly resist any agreement that would involve surrender of territory, and that would be because obviously surrendering any part of the Donbass that would open up a corridor for the Russians to advance if they were allowed to occupy it, because the Russians certainly can't take it through military action. They're still absorbing incredible casualties. And all of this, it's as I have said before, this is primarily a battle of political wills. And it's multi-part. It's a three-way battle of political wills. The European allies who see their best self-interest in supporting Ukraine, and at best case, obtaining victory or Russian withdrawal. That would be their maximalist goal. If the Ukrainians, they want national sovereignty and guarantee of freedom from future Russian attacks. And right now, their only viable option right now is to continue inflicting superior casualties on the Russians, continue attacking their logistical infrastructure, their air defenses, and trying to create the pretext for launching a successful counteroffensive. And that to me is their best realistic option for ending it without the active full-fledged support of the United States. It's a very delicate balancing act and a contest of political wills at the same time. So I would say that right now this is it's a fascinating contest of wills, to be sure. And I would say that that President Trump and his team are going to have to learn some very valuable lessons. Their declared national security strategy is a starting point. At least we know what their codified mindset is for executing their national security strategy. We know what their priorities are. We know that they consider China to be the principal threat. And by not mentioning Russia, you could either interpret it as that Russia is not the primary threat because they are not capable of threatening us in the way that China is. That could be a possibility. Sasha, we may have to, Ivan and you and Ivan and I may have to shift our emphasis a little bit more to see what China's perspective and real capabilities are in future iterations. But I would say right now that it's at a very delicate balancing point. And,
about China, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
China is not directly involved in the Russia-Ukrainian war, number one. Number two, it's not involved in any negotiations. They're making some comments from time to time, but they are very little really involved at that point. And I think it's a very, I think there is a lot of wisdom on the Chinese side.
Well, they always take the long view.
Yeah, they're taking a long view. So, yeah, okay, that's true that sooner or later this war will be over because Putin is not going to be there forever and many other factors.
And Russia will be in a severely weakened position vis-a-vis China. China might well be able to impose concessions on the part of Russia, which is right now, I would say at best, a junior partner of China Russia is not the dominant partner in any alliance or agreement. And the Chinese have, that you've seen those stories of the Chinese having these new maps published, which show Chinese possession of territories which were supposed to be part of Russia. So that is also an interesting dynamic.
But China is not in a rush to
No,
control parts of Russia simply because they have everything what they need. They have it cheap anyway. They're getting Russian resources with great discount or so on. So I really don't see China trying to enhance its position with Russia because it already has a great position. As we see.
and the rest may just fall into their laps by
Yeah,
the deterioration of Russia, because Russia's has and will have even worse demographic problems and economic problems. I would argue for the remainder of the 21st century, they are going to have a very difficult time recovering even after this war ends.
by the way, it's very interesting thing to what I told you a little bit about my personal business many, many
Mhm.
years. We're talking about almost 30 years ago, 1997, 1998, something.
Is your relative still speaking to you?
Not really, because he just passed away around
Uh,
10 years ago or so on.
that happens.
Yeah, things happen like this. Now, what I wanted to say with this regards is that you already can see how Trump is infiltrating the Ukrainian leadership. Last thing, what he said just yesterday, I think, that his beautiful peace plan is appreciated and agreed by everybody. All Ukrainian ministers and officials and everybody in Russia agreed, and Europe agrees, except one man,
Zelensky.
Zelensky. That's all, just one man. So there will be elections or not. Okay, he will be moved. Zelensky replied, yes, we can have election, provided that somebody will provide security for Ukraine, because Ukraine will, for several months, will not be able to fight. There will be people who would have to vote, including the soldiers on the front lines. All citizens of Ukraine would have to
Exactly. So
and
how can you conduct an election when a war is still going on? As a matter of fact, that was a severe problem in the American Civil War,
right.
because because uh, because the re-election of President Lincoln could not take place. You could not have any votes in the Confederate States because they were still at war with the Confederate States. So you had if you looked at the polit and the Democratic Party at that time was running General McClellan as an opponent to President Lincoln, and of course, McClellan had not been one of Lincoln's best generals, but then McClellan decided that he was going to oppose President Lincoln, and the Democratic Party was essentially the pro-slavery party. They were the ones in favor of the Confederacy, and so that was a real mess. And ultimately, the Electoral College system used only those states that were part of the Union in the election. And Lincoln won by just barely. And that arguably was the best political chance for the Confederacy to achieve its independence, if they could have elected a pro-Confederacy president in charge of the Union. So now you have this situation, oddly, where history is rhyming, as Mark Twain used to say. You have a situation where you have Zelensky is basically symbolizes Ukrainian sovereignty. Yes, there may be corruption. There probably is a significant degree of corruption within the Ukrainian government. But guess what? That's common to all countries. There's some degree of corruption because of flawed human nature, flawed morality of human nature. You're going to have that in every country to one extent or another. Not to the same degree, but to one extent or another, you're going to have corruption. So to say that the Ukrainian leadership is corrupt, I would say back, compared to whom?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Now, another thing is something came in the last few days, understanding that whatever agreement United States want to sign with Ukraine and Russia, or it's even unclear agreement between whom and whom is going to be signed, who is signing for which side. Under international law, all these agreements are null and void. There is not even formula how it could sound legitimate enough for application of international law. So far, and you know who was the party who actually noticed that and moved to rectify it? Mr. Putin. Because what they've discussed with Witkov and Kushner and so on, everything was agreed upon and it was nice and cozy, but they could not put it into the international law formula. So he asked Witkov, Kushner, whoever, is to bring certain caliber of lawyers and officials to make it sound as international law, and so Senate could ratify it. So that's not done. It's not being done yet. So there even some mechanism. You can agree on anything, but if it cannot be formulated and comply with international law, this is not even worth a piece of paper on whatever it was written. So that is far away from being resolved one way or another. Zelensky knows about it, but he keeps quiet. Less European, they know how to speak to Trump, because if Zelensky will say it, Trump say, you are miserable, whatever, and so on.
So he basically Zelensky is following the advice with something that I believe President Lincoln once said, is that it is better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak up and remove all doubt. So Zelensky has learned his lessons quite well, and now by being patient and quiet, now what is being discussed, the possibility I've read that it's being discussed, is to have an armistice or a ceasefire in the same way between North Korea and South Korea. As you know, North Korea and South Korea are still technically in a state of war. There has never been a true peace signed between North and South Korea. They are still technically in a state of war with each other. However, there is a demilitarized zone, which you notice, some circles in the West are talking about establishing a demilitarized zone. So there is a point of view that is trying to say, let's have the same agreement that we have between North and South Korea, and have that now between Russia and Ukraine. Again, that's the best they can come up with. So right now, the situation is still very much in play, and the Korean conflict, I would point out, was ended when President Eisenhower threatened to use nuclear weapons. And
Eisenhower didn't think about grabbing $250 billion.
No. He was thinking purely altruistically. One of our best and most underrated presidents.
Yes,
because we never, with President Eisenhower, United States never got involved in any new wars. There were no new wars under the Eisenhower administration. And the thing was, when Eisenhower, the conqueror of Hitler, as was his reputation, when he threatens to use nuclear, if you threaten to use nuclear weapons, you have to be credible. In other words, the other side must believe that you will, in fact, carry out your threat. Well, the Chinese believed Eisenhower. They believed him, and everybody else believed Eisenhower. So he didn't have to follow through with that. They agreed to make peace. So right now, you could say if President Trump were to threaten to use nuclear weapons, he has more credibility than a lot of other people, but there is not the same dynamic operating here. So achieving an armistice or any cessation of warlike efforts on the part of Russia, I still insist, will depend. It's really pretty much in the hands of Ukraine. Can Ukraine throw the decisive counterpunch? that will force the Russians to stop. And the only way you do that is not to achieve a victory on the Eastern Front, where they're basically locked in a dance of death with each other, the Russians much more so than Ukraine. But to achieve that victory in what I contend all along is the true center of gravity of this war, the Crimea. So we wait and see. I would say I'm looking very much forward to the early spring of next year, to where I would say the decisive battle in favor of Ukraine will take place. What say you?
Jonathan, I'm afraid that if Ukrainian would about to start this attack, United States under Donald Trump will be furiously against it, and they would threaten Ukraine that if they will start anything in Crimea or anywhere else, they will stop providing intelligence, and they may assist Russians actually to defeat Ukraine on the front lines. And I'm afraid that this is, see, if you think about it, tomorrow is very important meeting in Europe. It's all European leaders like France, UK, Germany, Zelensky of Ukraine, maybe a few others that I'm omitted. And it's unclear if US will participate in it, and if yes, who exactly will represent US. It's still unclear today, although meetings starting tomorrow. If US, as during this year, US did not help the Ukraine at all. They were selling weapons to Europe, charging full price. By the way, there are no discounts, and then Europe would provide these weapons to Ukraine. So if US is not there, they're not on Ukrainian side, it looks more and more than they are on Russian side, and that is being reflected in Trump's new security strategy, that Russia is friend, Russia should be. And in fact, in the financial situation, there is much more possible future investments is pledged for Russia than Ukraine, just for you to know. And in this case, there could be a question for Europe and Ukraine, why they need US participation in any peace talks between Ukraine and Russia.
That could well be the result. The Europeans will say, well, we're going to take this on ourselves, and we're sorry if you don't want to participate, but that's going to be the price. And that could be a very difficult lesson. So right now, it's as I keep saying, it's a titanic contest of political wills on all parties concerned.
Jonathan, but there are already precedent back in the 90s, beginning of 2000. Trump was taking a gamble on his casinos in Atlantic City, and we know the story, what's the result of it, and so on. So I think Trump is taking even much bigger gamble today with the United States and his presidency by going against the will of American people. Only 2% of American people consider Russia as either a friend or possible friend or anything. It's 2%. So 98% of American electorate, rightly or wrongly, considered Russia to be its biggest enemy. So Trump,
there's a lot of historical memory and historical experience with Russians and what their behavior toward the United States has been that would make that a very plausible assumption, and that is something that the Trump administration is going to have to take into account in its future actions in enforcing its national security strategy.
Well, that security strategy is a strategy until it's being implemented. Right now, Trump has great difficulties to implement his own security strategy because most of the American people, most of the congressmen, most of the senators, they are firmly against it. And I don't see how Trump will prevail to convince majority of American people, Senate and Congress and so on, that Russia is a friend, that we have to be friendly with Russia, we have to help Russia, we have to do this or that, and we have to get Ukraine agree to basically a capitulation. There is no other word comes to
Yeah.
mind.
Well, it parallels. Remember the example of President Jimmy Carter. He came into office and he tried to tell the American people that we should not have this what he quote inordinate fear of communism. And then he learned a hard lesson when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and Jimmy Carter's eyes were opened. And then he began to take firm action against the Soviet Union, including initiating that major defense buildup, which then his successor, President Reagan, all he had to do was step on the accelerator and increase that defense buildup even more and initiate further actions against the Soviet Union. So, yes, there is historical precedent. It does not mean that the Trump administration cannot be made to see the light or to see a different perspective. And we can always hope for that. But the only question is, how big of a shock will it take for the Trump administration to see things differently? That Russia is not really its friend in any respect.
The clock is ticking on Trump's presidency. The midterm election are less than a year ahead. It's November next year. And the way things look now, even in domestic issues, tariffs, and now this horrible so-called peace agreement, which it's not even capitulation, it's worse than capitulation, in my opinion. But we'll see how it will play out. Yeah. And in the meantime,
there are a lot of cards to be played between now and then.
Yeah. John, have a great week, and thank you very much
for
this program. And to all our listeners, glory to Ukraine, United States.
God bless America. Canada. God bless Canada, too.
Thank you. And we'll see you on Tuesday. Same place, same time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.